During the height of COVID, one Netflix show dominated the internet. From memes to think pieces and true crime investigations, Tiger King well and truly became one of the most talked about series of the decade. However, almost a decade before the show came out, legendary filmmaker Louis Theroux had already met Joe Exotic and a whole number of players in this web of stories. In 2011, Louis visited Joe's zoo, the Greater Wynnewood Animal Park, or GW Zoo as it's usually referred to, as part of a larger story that would investigate America's most dangerous pets. At the time, Joe was far from a household name, and the world of big cat collectors was largely hidden from the mainstream public. In fact, Louis was among the first journalists to delve into the world of private big cat and chimp ownership in the United States. If you're interested, I have also covered the backstory of Louis and his controversial relationship with Jimmy Savile, which is very interesting, and I highly recommend you guys go check it out if you haven't seen it already. And while you're there, you may as well subscribe to the channel because I'm getting these videos out weekly now. Well, just about. But as always, Louis' approach to Joe was to immerse himself in his subject's world, capturing a large portion of the documentary at the GW Zoo. The opening scene sees Louis in a meeting with the GW keepers and Joe discussing the threat of a tornado heading towards the park, with Joe warning that the weather reports he had seen was unlike anything he had ever seen, and had warned that it could potentially lead to tigers escaping into Oklahoma City.
You have how many tigers here?
176.
So it could release the tigers
It could be a disaster.
into Oklahoma.
From his first interactions with Joe, Louis immediately realized there was something slightly more eccentric to Joe's character, with self-promoting posters of Joe's magic shows scattered across the park. With the tornado looming over Joe's park, he set off with Louis to rescue a tiger from a private owner who outgrew his enclosure. It was the first time that Louis had witnessed the realities of private big cat ownership, poor living conditions, and a bodging mentality to the facilities. Once they got back to Joe's quote-unquote sanctuary with the leopard and tigers, he took Louis on a tour to make sure the chimps and big cats were locked down for the tornado. It was at this point that Joe seemed to revel or enjoy the intimidation that Louis felt from the tiger coming up to the fence, and told Louis that he would shoot him if he got attacked by a tiger.
That's your girlfriend, tell him.
Do you like it when they do that to you?
No, we don't encourage that. I'd just shoot you. It'd be more humane.
You would shoot me
Yeah.
in the head?
Yeah.
With the threat of the tornado luckily avoiding the park, the following day, Louis had his first interactions with the other side to Joe's business, a breeding program of petable young wild animals, from tigers to bear cubs. Joe argued that the animals will never be wild animals, and they can't really miss a wild they've never experienced. Joe then took Louis into his home, where he was hand-raising ligers. It was also at this time where Louis discovered that Joe had two gay boyfriends who lived and worked with him, but he justified breeding animals in captivity because he believed that tigers would go extinct, and wanted to raise tigers to respect humans.
Why breed them?
So in 10 to 15 years, when there's none left in the wild, we'd have some in captivity to replace the wild.
You think they'll go extinct in the wild?
I know they will.
How will you raise this one?
This one will be raised to know us.
To know you?
Yeah.
You'll be that tiger's mom, in effect.
Yep. For the rest of his life.
In a way, you're raising the tiger to be half tiger, half human.
Well, I'm going to raise him to be a tiger and respect humans.
Following on, Louis would visit Joe's roadside tour with young animals, which was the main source of income for the park, hinting at the questionable cycle Joe was facilitating. Breed new young cubs for the roadside tours, and once they get too old, lock them up in cages, essentially hiding behind the visage of a sanctuary, when in reality, it was a vicious cycle just to keep the park running. Louis discovered that the animals could be on the road for up to 2 months, and on a good day, the tour would make up to $4,000 a day. When he pressed the keepers about whether the animals were happy in the cages, he was met with this response. Now, Joe wasn't the only big cat owner that Louis met, but every owner he did meet with all seemed to enjoy the discomfort that Louis felt with wild animals, almost using the unpredictability of the animal to reflect their own traits within their personality or character. But back at Joe's place, Louis followed him preparing for his Exotic Animal Expo, where other exotic animal owners from across the country converged at the GW Zoo to get lessons from Joe on how to take better care of their exotic animals, which definitely attracted some interesting characters. Towards the end of the documentary, Joe received a letter from a patron who decided not to visit the park after researching the alleged abuse that Peter had documented.
So what do you take from that letter?
What I take from that letter? Ignorant people believe anything they fucking read on the internet.
So your point about the letter was that's what you're up against?
Yes.
And that's hurting you?
Financially, we were expecting a check in that envelope.
Because of the overwhelming allegations from animal rights groups and more malls refusing to book the tour show, Joe was on the brink of financial ruin. But for him, closing the park wasn't an option, as he was planning to move his brother's grave from Texas to the GW Park, the place which he was named after. Further on, Joe revealed that he and his parents took the money from Gerald's death and invested it into purchasing the land for the park, and eventually building their first row of cages.
If GW saw this place, he'd be proud.
I know he's proud.
It's been a hard week.
You know, with being sick and stressed out over money and everything else.
In an attempt to pull in more customers, Louis also found out that Joe was trying to naturally recreate a saber-toothed tiger.
Whose idea was that?
It's just, scientists are trying to do it in test tubes all day long. Joe's actually done this naturally.
This is Joe's idea? What's the idea behind it?
It's kind of like the zoos and stuff want it. It's kind of like the woolly mammoth. They're trying to remake the woolly mammoth in test tubes and recreate all the past.
In one of his last standoffs with Joe, Louis discussed his roadside shows and his willing commitment to euthanize all 1,400 of his animals if people continue to run him out of business.
If that's what they want, before they run me out of business, I'll euthanize every damn animal on this place.
But if you think it's wrong for them to do it, why would you do it?
Because I'm not gonna let them do it.
Are you always like this, or are you under a lot of stress?
No, I'm always like this.
For the last 10 years?
Yeah, I was like this before.
When you were a cop?
Yep.
You must have been a pretty weird cop.
I was a weird cop.
Now, almost a decade after Theroux's documentary, Netflix released Tiger King in March 2020, and as we all know, the series exploded in popularity, becoming a defining cultural moment during the early days of COVID. The show's success was like a whirlwind concoction of all the right elements to create a magnified moment in time. Millions across the planet were locked down and hungry for distraction, and the show's insane characters, shocking plot twists, and the widely unknown world of big cats made it impossible not to watch. While Tiger King provided plenty of entertainment and meme material, it left viewers with many unanswered questions, the main being the circumstances surrounding Joe Exotic's conviction and imprisonment, and the ever-mounting rumours and conspiracy theories about Carole Baskin's missing husband, Don Lewis. In April 2019, Joe was ultimately convicted on 2 counts of hiring someone to murder Carole Baskin, as well as multiple counts of animal abuse. According to federal indictments, Joe paid an individual $3,000 to travel to Florida to kill Baskin, and discuss payment for the completion of the crime. In a second plot, he was connected with an undercover FBI agent posing as a hitman. Despite his conviction, Joe maintained his innocence. While Carole has never been charged with any crime relating to Lewis's disappearance, Tiger King's presentation of the case and Joe Exotic's relentless accusations fueled widespread speculation, with one of the main being that she put her husband through a meat grinder and fed him to the tigers. But it wasn't until January 2020, 2 months before the release of Tiger King, that Joe was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison for the murder for hire plot against Carole. The show didn't show the sentencing. However, it created a movement of people calling for Joe to be freed from prison, with the question of a presidential pardon reaching Donald Trump.
I don't know. I know nothing about it. He has 22 years for what? What did he do?
Allegedly hired someone to murder an animal rights activist, but he said that he didn't do that, and he was.
You think he didn't do it? Are you on his side?
Well,
are you recommending a pardon?
No, I'm not advocating anything.
As a reporter, you're not allowed to do that. You'd be criticized by these. Would you recommend a pardon?
I'm not weighing in on Tiger King.
I don't think you would. I don't think you would. Go ahead. You have a question? I'll take a look.
In May 2020, Louis Theroux was on the Graham Norton show, where he talked about the insane success of Tiger King and his time making his film with Joe.
Joe Exotic, you were there first.
I knew him before he was famous, and spent really the best part of a week with him for a documentary I did in 2011 called America's Most Dangerous Pets. And he was, back then as he is now, well, now he's behind bars, spoiler alert, he was still running a zoo, and he had, I think, 150 tigers, and back then he also had 2 husbands. One of the husbands was the same, and another of the husbands was a different husband. And if I have any regrets, it's that I didn't talk to him more about that. The only thing he said about that at the time was that it was along the lines of, well, when we're going to get it on, it's either all of us involved or it doesn't happen. Like he basically had a rules of engagement for 3 persons.
A few days later, on the 2nd of June 2020, Carole was awarded control of the GW Park after a federal judge ruled that Joe had fraudulently transferred the property to his mother to avoid a $1 million trademark judgment that Baskin's Big Cat Rescue had won back in 2013. You see, back in 2016, Baskin had sued Joe's mum, which led to the ownership of the 16-acre zoo transferring over to Carole, which subsequently meant that a federal judge ordered the zoo's then operator, Jeff Lowe, to vacate the premises and eventually moved the zoo's 160 big cats to a new location in Oklahoma. With Jeff forced off the property, this left the zoo abandoned, with enclosures left to crumble and pathways overgrown.
Camel treats?
This might have been his house, because I remember there was like a big sectional.
If Carole killed her husband, clap your hands.
Now fast forward to January 2021, several months after the release of Tiger King, US politician Mike Quigley introduced the Big Cat Public Safety Act. This law change was heavily campaigned by Carole. The act introduced essentially prevents people from importing, exporting, buying, transporting, receiving, or acquiring big cats from across state lines or the US border. In 2021, it was announced that Louis was in the process of making a follow-up film. Louis stated, "It's an extraordinary situation Joe is in now. He's one of the most famous people in the world, arguably. He's an internet icon. Carole is also extremely famous. I think that is a testament to the series and also lockdown and the collective madness of that period of time." Louis also mentioned how he believed that Joe and Baskin's fame is a mixed blessing, because fans tend to view them as fictional characters, instead of real people involved in real crime. Just over a year after the release of Tiger King, Louis' documentary was released, called Shooting Joe Exotic. The film would follow the wake of Tiger King's depiction of Joe's conspiracy to murder Carole Baskin and the subsequent social media movement to free Joe Exotic. At the start of the film, Louis revealed that he was forwarded a letter from Joe in prison because he was mentioned. The letter read, "I'm being kept down locked 24/7 with nothing. No phone, email or commissary, so my life sucks. My soul is dying fast. Please tell everyone in the UK that I love them, and message Louis Theroux that I need to tell the real story, but they keep me silenced." This letter and the unanswered questions of Tiger King became an irresistible reason for Louis to revisit the story 9 years later. Although it would seem letters weren't that special, as when Louis met with Joe's lawyers, they revealed that Joe had written over 5,000 letters to fans in just 4 months, which they suggested made him the most popular prison inmate in the history of the United States. In Louis' original documentary, there was no mention of Carole Baskin. However, in unseen footage in Louis' new documentary, he uncovered him questioning Joe about Carole, where Joe was videoed for the first time speaking about the conspiracy that Carole fed her husband to the tigers.
Someone called Carole Baskin. Who is she?
She's a psychotic woman that supposedly killed her husband in '97 but owns Big Cat Rescue in Tampa, Florida.
What shocked Louis, as he reviewed footage that he hadn't seen for over a decade, was the dark and serious references to the possibility of Carole being killed.
But with the camera off, I want to show you how serious this is getting. People are so fed up with it that this guy right here is a hitman in Tampa, Florida. And he's gotten off of everything he's ever done, and people are considering it. That's how out of control this is getting.
What is the next step?
If we can't get anywhere with this lawsuit, somebody's just gonna have to. Seriously, it's getting to the point somebody's gonna die. She's either going to kill one of us or somebody's gonna have her killed.
As the documentary continued, Louis unearthed his footage of unseen interviews with a keeper and Joe's husbands who spoke of Joe's need for companionship and his ability to manipulate and get people to do what he wants. It basically painted the picture that Joe's rehabilitation of the humans who work for him are needed in the same way as his animals. In an interview in promotion of Shooting Joe Exotic, Louis said, "The part of Joe that is maybe misunderstood is his vulnerability, but also the sense that his fragile qualities gave him a kind of power. If you were in his orbit, it was hard just not to be charmed by him. But at the same time, that meant supporting him, and being aware he was thin-skinned and tiptoeing around him. I was conscious that he wasn't robust in the way that many big personalities are. By the end of the 8 or 9 days I'd spent with him, I'd run out of road." Louis also recounted how before leaving Joe for the final time, he tried to get one last encounter to wrap things up. But what was striking, watching the footage back, wasn't that he was upset. It's not every day I interview someone, and then at the end, I need a hug from them to make sure they're okay. It says something about how he was able to solicit those feelings of protectiveness from those around him. But I needed the hug. He didn't even want the hug. Another aspect explored in the films was when Louis spoke to Joe's niece, where they discussed his ultimate goal of becoming famous. When Louis met Joe back in 2011, he was producing a low-budget YouTube show, but it wasn't until a few years later that TV producer Rick Kirkham was enlisted by Joe to produce a reality show about the daily life at GW Zoo. Now, as we all know, this is where much of the Tiger King Netflix show picks up, documenting that period of time where Joe essentially believed that his shit didn't stink, and reveled in his growing fame thanks to his public spats with activists. Speaking of activists, Louis then finally took a visit to the Big Cat Rescue to interview Carole Baskin for the first time.
How do you account for the level of hatred he had for you, Carole?
I think because an organization like PETA coming after him is an organization, whereas with me, he could blame it on a single person, but the battle was never with him. The battle's always been to protect the big cats from people like him.
We were the ones who were stopping the mall exhibits.
Right.
We were effective. We were having an impact. One by one, these malls were saying, no, you can't come here anymore. And that, understandably, really pissed him off.
Theroux continued to explore the impact of the Tiger King phenomenon on her life, with Carole describing the barrage of online harassments and threats she received, as well as the frustrations of the way the Netflix show portrayed her, once again reiterating her innocence regarding the disappearance of her husband. However, as filming progressed, Louis received an email with a letter attachment from a law firm, acting on behalf of the producers of Tiger King. In the letter, they told Louis that any involvement from many of the characters from Tiger King in Louis' documentary would violate their exclusivity agreements and make Louis liable for, quote, interference with contracts. AKA, they basically said, if you want to use any of the characters, you're getting sued. Louis had no idea that they were under an exclusive contract, and also received information that Joe had signed something to stop Louis contacting him. However, Louis could interview his lawyers, who very much believed that there was a possibility that Joe could get a presidential pardon. But for Louis, the problem was that Tiger King was such a phenomenon that many of the characters who were involved in the show were inundated with the world's media, which made getting other interviews difficult. With the Baskins now in control of GW Zoo, Louis met them at the park 9 years after first visiting. This final walk around the park allowed Louis to get a sense of perspective on the story that he became intertwined with a decade earlier. The entire park was covered in graffiti and was completely trashed by Jeff's previous ownership. Inside Joe's house, Louis found nudes and the rubble of Joe's memories. But with both of Louis' documentaries, they've consistently highlighted the animals at the center of these highly dramatic human stories. A few months after Louis' second documentary, Carole sold Joe's former zoo for $140,000, stipulating that the new owners aren't allowed to use the land for a zoo or wildlife park for 100 years. And on the 28th of January 2022, a federal judge resentenced Joe to 21 years in prison, reducing his original sentence by 1 year. Now, this insane story got even more crazy when a biopic TV series depicting Joe and Carole's battle against each other was released. The comedy drama had actors playing all the usual suspects from Tiger King. By December of the same year, President Biden signed a bill into law that would hold the exploitation of big cats by preventing unlicensed people from owning, breeding, or transporting the animals. This law also introduced licensed exhibitors, which is mainly zoos and sanctuaries, from allowing the public to touch wild animals or hold cubs, which made it the second law change due to the Netflix show and Big Cat Rescue's campaigning. In 2023, Carole and her husband Howard closed a Big Cat Rescue sanctuary in Tampa, Florida, relocating their remaining cats to the Turpin Creek Wildlife Refuge in Arkansas. By the end of 2023, all the cats were successfully relocated, and by late 2024, Carole had sold the property. A year later, in September 2025, Tiger Handler, who had acquired some of Joe's tigers from the GW Zoo, was mauled to death by a tiger at his family-run zoo in southeastern Oklahoma. The handler was 37-year-old Ryan Easley, who was near the end of a performance show when a tiger that he had raised since it was a cub suddenly attacked him. 15 years before, Joe had also let some of Ryan's tigers stay at the GW Zoo during winter. After hearing about the news from prison, Joe Exotic expressed his condolences on Facebook, stating, "First of all, I would like to send my prayers to Ryan Easley's family for their loss. I've known Ryan for many years. He built a large compound on the backside of my zoo to house tigers during the winter, one year about 15 or so years ago. No one can blame the tiger for what happened. We all take risks in what we do, and we don't need further laws to ban tigers because of this, because you can get killed doing just about anything. A few days later, in response to all the news about Ryan being reported with Joe's name attached, Joe tweeted, "This is the crap I'm sick of. CNN drags me into this story to make a headline worth reading, and I had nothing to do with this dude other than 18 years ago I let him keep his tigers at my zoo for one winter. Sick of being exploited for headlines. When will Donald Trump wake up and see this crap? Trump, let's sue CNN." Now, incredibly, Joe is still throwing a large amount of resources into proving his innocence, with him or his team posting basically daily on Twitter, where he campaigns with videos from prison.
We have the evidence now, and I encourage you to go look at my new website. It's called joeexoticofficial.com, and it's got all the evidence and the videos of them admitting to perjury now. Alan Glover even admitted and took, and I believe that was in Tiger King 2, he actually took them to the zoo and showed them how they were going to kill me if this didn't work.
Joe is also extremely consistent on his YouTube channel, where his team are posting weekly 10 to 15 minute long podcasts talking about freeing Joe Exotic and conspiracies around his case. And of course, they're all voiced by AI. The success of Tiger King propelled its creators, Eric Good and Rebecca Chalklin, to further explore the world of exotic animal ownership like Louis Theroux. Their latest project, the HBO docuseries Chimp Crazy, follows the story of monkey mum Tonya Haddix, who is very similar to Jill James, who was featured in Louis' original documentary. In fact, Jill's chimp was so unpredictable it broke the glass in front of Louis. Louis Theroux's involvement in Joe Exotic and Carole Baskin's story predates the Tiger King phenomenon by nearly a decade. His early work documented the strange, often disturbing realities of private big cat ownership in America, and captured the seeds of the personal and legal dramas that would later captivate the world. Through his return documentary, Theroux provided much needed context and depth to the story that's been sensationalized by Netflix, exposing the real dangers, obsessions, and consequences behind the headlines. Thank you for watching, it really does mean a lot to me. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe to the channel for weekly videos, and follow me on all of my socials at Phat Mima.